All right, I haven't done a video in a while, and there's good reasons for that. I'm not going to go into that, but I will tell you this, that none of my opinions here reflect back on my employer or anything they're involved with. This is just me, a dude with an opinion, nothing else. So with that, let's get started. First, why am I making a video? And then what it's about. I'm making a video because I've got a lull. I'm trying to keep myself from doing stupid things. So I figured, this is stupid, but at least it's harmless. So here we go. So I'm going to talk about one, two, three, four, five, six topics tonight, and I'm going to go through them pretty quick so I don't waste your time. And those six topics are one, the advancement of AI. And this is sort of a recap of where we are in the last 8 months. I'd say since about 2025 in November, the models, the LLMs crossed a Rubicon where they became really useful as a mid-level to senior, low-end senior level software engineer. And a bunch of other tasks like art and stuff has just become amazing. Nano Banana 2, Grok, Imagine, just a bunch of different Z image, bunch of different things. So the models are really useful. And then just recently, as of yesterday, I believe, the date is early June, early to mid June in 2026. Anthropic just released Fable 5, which is what they call a Mythos class model. And from what I'm seeing, that model actually is more a top senior level software engineer and architect type person where you can one shot things with it that are actually really useful. And then you tie that up with guardrails and agentic spec driven type development, and you've got real power. And there's been a Grognard pushback saying that AI won't replace jobs and everything's okay and all that. I'm not so sure, but there is one thing I'll mention in their favor here shortly. Number two is that when LLMs first came out, if you jumped on them, you were pretty cool because you were kind of a front runner and an early mover. I would say that advantage is gone. The normies, the people who stood on the sideline and scoffed, they're all fully in on LLMs at this point. Some people are still reserved, some people don't like them, but I guarantee you, if they're in software development at big corporations or pretty much anywhere, they're using them. So the first mover advantage is gone. And it's especially gone because using LLMs, how most people use them, is pretty much moat free. If you're a senior software developer, you can go through and figure out how to use or the APIs to connect to the frontier models in an hour. If you use AI to do it, you can do it in 15 minutes. And it's easy. The prompting, spend 10, 15 minutes kind of looking at the best practices for prompting, and you're at mid-level in prompt engineering. Now, the agentic stuff and the context engineering takes a little bit more, but not much. So there's no moat. Number three, what we are seeing with these like Mythos class models, I'm sure OpenAI and others are going to respond to that, is that there is starting to be a token divide. And what I mean by that is we're evolving now to where there's kind of this free AI out there, and that free AI exists to get you into using LLMs, but it also exists to use for you to use so you can train or create data for the models to train on, more data, and also for psychological profiling of yourself. If you put stuff on an LLM and you give it permission to train on that data, which is pretty much the default, or you can't use it at that level, that data is admissible by court. It can be sold to third parties, yada, yada, yada. So I think we've all been fairly casual, or most of us, with LLM usage. Might be time to rethink that a bit. But you've got your low end and your mid tier, which is $20 ish now, where you can get a lot of value out of it. But that tier will become more expensive over time, I think. And then you've got like the elite and elite plus tiers, which would be this Fable 5 Mythos class model and other high-end models where you've got to put in $200 or $300 at minimum to get the most out of these models. And they're absolutely worth it for the right kind of context. Some people are saying AI is dead because inference costs are no longer being subsidized. Now, the inference costs are going through the roof for some model providers, the frontier ones. But even if you're, like, say, a software engineer and you're spending essentially your salary on inference, meaning you cost double what you normally cost, if companies getting 3 to 20 times more productivity out of you, and that isn't going to be a universal given. It could actually be less productivity than just one of you. But depending on how things are set up, it could be 20 plus. It's totally worth the spend. So those that isn't going anywhere. Um, the fourth thing, or I guess, yeah, the fourth thing is an alternative to that. We all know that there's open source Chinese models, which are really good. There's the Gemma 4 family of models that are good. So local inference, where you have small models like me, I'm limited to 8 gigs of VRAM unless I want to run something in the cloud. But if I want to run something local, that's currently my cap. And I can run a Gemma class model, say like a 12 billion parameter model at a quantized, uh, say K4 quant. And I can run it mostly in my GPU with a little bit of overspill into my CPU. And it's useful. I'm getting about 80K thousand context out of that. And there's a lot of things I can do with that on some of the Quen models, the Chinese open source models. I might even be able to get higher context at that and get some decent speed. Usually not great speed on my computer, between 11 to 20 tokens a second, depending on what model it is. But you're getting some useful stuff. And for basic chat type stuff, I'd say it's almost equivalent in usefulness as, say, Chat GPT-3, the early model was. Now, it's not going to have the depth of Chat GPT-3 because Chat GPT-3 was a multi-hundred billion parameter model, and you're running an extremely smaller version, quantized down. But it is, to me, amazing on how good local inference has gotten. It is no replacement for frontier models when you're doing things like coding, but can it be useful, especially in a agentic work task? Absolutely. So I think the win for a lot of people isn't going to be using frontiers or local. It's going to be a high-low mix, or depending on what you're doing and what stage of things you're doing it at, you're going to be switching models around. The fifth thing I want to talk about is just, and it's something you're probably pretty well aware of, is AI video is almost there. In fact, it probably is there just because of the cost. Now, the cost of using AI to make a like feature production is way less than what it would be if a studio made a production the standard way. But it's still way above what most small groups of people could afford to spend. You might start seeing some people with like 60,000 bucks or something like that, maybe 120,000 bucks that they can spend, and they can make a couple hour video that would be pretty good. But if even just some of those studios, and I'm sure they're already starting to use AI, but if a project was all AI using some of the latest frontier video models like Dance and Kling and some Grok, Imagine, and some others, I think it's doable. It's just not really being done because there's this middle ground between what studios can afford and what small indies can afford. But once the models get a little bit better, a little bit cheaper, and skill sets and agentic workflows happen, you're already seeing 10-minute videos. We're going to see 30-minute videos and hour and a half videos that are all AI generated. And I think it's going to happen. I'm sure it's happening now, but it's going to happen to where you're going to start seeing some of them on normal distribution channels fairly quickly, although distribution channels will resist that. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of an emerging thing for me watching, is I like to watch kind of the blur between games, virtual reality, chatbots, and how that all kind of blurs together perceptually on what a person experiences almost like an avatar in the Matrix, I guess you could say. And there's a saying, the revolution will not be televised. And I could dovetail that into a whole bunch of discussions, but let's keep it on LLM chatbots and virtual spaces for right now. I think there's something going on that some people are talking about, but not, and people are aware of it, just not to the extent of it. If you look at Character AI, which is a chatbot community, that was one of the most trafficked websites in the top five until recently. I think it's dropped down a couple spots. There's some legal compliance stuff and some lawsuits, and I guess the owners of it are actually kind of looking to sell. But it's still in the top 10, top 15 of all visited sites. I did a dive on what's available for chatbot stuff a couple months ago, and I was just shocked at how many sites there are, how many of them are fairly X-rated. And again, the revolution will not be televised. No one's really talking about this much. There's a couple people talking about it on the periphery, but a lot of the talk is condemnation and condescension, where it's like, the only two paths that people consider are normal, healthy relationships, and then this dysfunctional, deviant relationship with chatbots and stuff like that. But I think what people miss, and this is kind of tragic, is that the choice for a lot of people isn't binary like that, where it's like the normal relationships, the non-isolation, the dealing with fellow human beings in good, healthy ways isn't necessarily an option, or that option is a lot harder for a lot of people now as society kind of fragments and we all go into our little tribal things and isolation. I think for a lot of people, that option is either a lot harder than it used to be, or it simply exists. So the option is either you go without those relationships and stimulus, or you use artificial means, which often are inferior, to simulate the same thing in your life. And I think that's the larger danger of AI and chatbots heading into what I call the hallmark problem, where you like Hallmark movies, there's whole demographics of people that watch Hallmark movies, and they do it because, maybe, and this is speculation on my part, I don't have hard data, but I do observe things. And it's like all these people, mostly boomer men, watch these stations. They're kind of sold this bill of goods on how life was going to be. They were going to meet the princess. They were going to be the knight in shining armor. There was going to be adversities. Then there was going to be triumph, and everybody would wind up how everything was supposed to be, fall in the line. There would be this happy ending. Or maybe their real lives either didn't have that happy ending, or the happy ending is much more complicated and not quite as clean. So there's an appeal to watch these movies and kind of get lost in scenarios where that more cleaner outcome that was kind of this vision that they were sold happens. And I think a similar thing is going to happen potentially with AI that's going to suck a lot of people in, further isolate them from society. It's going to be very quiet, and it's either going to not be talked about or talked about incorrectly. And I think it's the whole hallmark thing where kind of the sex bots and all this stuff, that's kind of the gateway thing. But really, the greater danger is building virtual spaces that are just so engaging and the story so user centric as far as the outcomes that a lot of people are just going to further go into isolation. And again, I think it's a two-part problem where I do think that it's not a great option. I think the better option is to go without and to just steel yourself and try to throw yourself into bettering yourself, bettering other people, and not getting bogged down in what you don't have in life versus what you do. But that's hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard. And a lot of people are not going to take that path. They're going to take the artificial path because the correct path either is carrot on the stick, doesn't deliver anymore, it's out of reach, or it's extremely hard and the other stuff is extremely easy. So I expect a larger problem that won't be talked about, but will be growing, will be the kind of LLM enabled spaces where people just go to kind of check out, almost like drugs, where it's nicer in a lot of ways than the broken, dystopic thing that we live in now in Western society. So people will opt for it. Watch for it. That's kind of the state of where we're at, I think. I don't think I have too much more to say, so I'll just leave it at that. Take care.